Millionaire hires a poor young woman to care for his elderly mother. The truth behind these walls is frightening. Welcome to the channel. Enjoy the video, give it a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, comment and share. Sarah Collins stood at the wrought iron gates of the Blackwood mansion, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The imposing structure loomed before her, its Victorian architecture a stark reminder of the wealth and power that lay beyond. At 25, Sarah had already faced more hardships than most people twice her age, but nothing could have prepared her for the secrets and lies that awaited her behind those ornate doors. As she pushed the intercom button, Sarah's mind wandered to her younger sister, Emily, who was depending on her to secure this job. With their parents gone, Sarah had become both mother and father to Emily, and the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. The voice that crackled through the speaker was crisp and businesslike, instructing her to come to the main entrance. Walking up the long driveway, Sarah couldn't help but feel like a trespasser in a world she didn't belong to. The manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges seemed to mock her worn shoes and second-hand coat. But she steeled herself, remembering the promises she'd made, to herself, to Emily, and to the memory of their parents. The massive oak door swung open before she could knock, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 50s. "You must be Sarah," she said, her voice as starched as her uniform. "I'm Linda Reynolds, the housekeeper. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you in his study. Follow me." Sarah trailed behind Linda, her eyes widening at the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, and antique furniture filled every room they passed. The air was thick with the scent of old money and carefully guarded secrets. They stopped at a door at the end of a long hallway. Linda knocked twice and then ushered Sarah inside. The study was a testament to power and influence, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk that looked like it could have belonged to a president. Behind that desk sat Andrew Blackwood, a man whose reputation preceded him. At 45, he was one of Boston's most eligible bachelors and one of its most feared businessmen. His steel-gray eyes seemed to pierce right through Sarah as she entered. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble, "please have a seat." Sarah sat, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Thank you for considering me for this position, Mr. Blackwood." Andrew leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Your references are impeccable, Miss Collins, but I must stress that this job requires the utmost discretion. My mother's condition is delicate. Can I trust that whatever happens within these walls will stay here?" Sarah nodded emphatically. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. I understand the importance of privacy." A ghost of a smile played on Andrew's lips. "Good. Because the salary I'm offering isn't just for your caregiving skills, it's for your silence as well." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the figure written there. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of, enough to secure Emily's future and pay off their parents' medical debts. "This is very generous," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I expect nothing but the best for my mother," Andrew replied. "You'll start immediately. Linda will show you to your room and brief you on your duties. You'll meet my mother in the morning." As Sarah left the study, her mind was reeling. The job seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed that way usually were. But she pushed her doubts aside. This was her chance to change everything for herself and Emily. Linda led her to a small but comfortable room on the 3rd floor. "You'll be on call 24/7, she explained. "Mrs. Blackwood's condition can be unpredictable. Some days she's as sharp as a tack, others—" Linda trailed off, a shadow passing over her face. "Is there anything else I should know?" Sarah asked, sensing there was more to the story. Linda hesitated, then said in a low voice, "Just be careful, Sarah. This house has secrets. Don't go looking for them if you know what's good for you." With that cryptic warning, Linda left, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the faint sound of classical music drifting through the walls. The next morning, Sarah woke early, determined to make a good impression. She dressed in her most professional outfit and made her way to Margaret Blackwood's suite on the 2nd floor. She knocked gently and entered when she heard a soft, "Come in." The room was bathed in morning light, and sitting by the window was Margaret Blackwood. At 72, she still possessed a regal beauty, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her posture impeccable. "Oh, you must be Sarah," Margaret said, her voice warm and inviting. "Come closer, dear, let me look at you." Sarah approached, feeling as if she were being appraised. Margaret's eyes, a striking blue that must have once matched her son's grey ones, seemed to look right into her soul. "You have kind eyes," Margaret said finally. "That's good. We need more kindness in this house." As Sarah began her duties helping Margaret with her morning routine, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this job than she had been told. Margaret's mood seemed to shift like quicksand, one moment lucid and sharp, the next confused and distant. "Sarah," Margaret said suddenly, gripping her arm with surprising strength, "you must be careful. The walls have ears, and not all of them are friendly." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Thomas Hartley, the family physician, entered the room. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Good morning, Margaret," he said cheerfully. "I see you've met our new caregiver." Margaret's demeanor changed instantly, becoming guarded. Yes, she'll do just fine, I think." Dr. Hartley turned to Sarah, extending his hand. "Thomas Hartley. I've been the Blackwood family doctor for longer than I care to admit. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." As Dr. Hartley examined Margaret, Sarah couldn't help but notice the looks that passed between them. There was a history there, unspoken, but palpable. Later that day, as Sarah was helping Margaret into bed for her afternoon nap, the older woman suddenly grabbed her hand. "Sarah, listen to me," she whispered urgently. "There's a key. You must find it. It's the only way to—" But before she could finish, Andrew appeared in the doorway. "How's she doing?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Just fine, dear," Margaret said, her voice suddenly light and airy. "Sarah is taking excellent care of me." Andrew nodded, his gaze lingering on Sarah. "Good. Remember, Miss Collins, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." As he left, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that his words held a double meaning. She looked back at Margaret, but the older woman had already drifted off to sleep, her secrets locked away once more. That night, as Sarah lay in her bed, her mind raced with questions. What was the key Margaret had mentioned? What secrets were hidden behind the Blackwood family's perfect facade? And why did she feel like she was being watched every moment? She thought of Emily, probably doing her homework right now in their tiny apartment across town. Sarah had called her earlier, assuring her that everything was fine, that this job was their ticket to a better life. But as she stared at the shadowy ceiling, Sarah wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The next few days passed in a blur of routines and whispered conversations. Sarah found herself growing fond of Margaret, whose moments of clarity revealed a sharp wit and a kind heart. But there were other moments when Margaret's eyes would go distant and she'd mutter about things that made no sense. It was during one of these episodes that Sarah made her first real discovery. She was helping Margaret change for bed when a small, ornate key fell from the folds of the older woman's robe. Sarah picked it up, but before she could hand it back, Margaret grabbed her wrist. "Keep it safe," she whispered, her eyes suddenly clear and intense. "It's the key to everything. But be careful who you trust, Sarah. Even the walls have eyes here." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Margaret's mood shifted again, and she began chattering about her garden as if nothing had happened. Sarah slipped the key into her pocket, her heart racing with the weight of this new secret. As she left Margaret's room that night, Sarah nearly collided with Andrew in the hallway. He steadied her with a hand on her arm, the touch lingering a moment too long. "Everything all right, Miss Collins?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. Sarah nodded, acutely aware of the key in her pocket. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, your mother is sleeping peacefully." Andrew's eyes seemed to search her face. "Good. You know, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? I'm glad you're here. My mother seems happier since you arrived." There was something in his tone that made Sarah's skin prickle. Was it gratitude or something else entirely? "Thank you," she managed to say. "I'm doing my best." Andrew smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you are. Good night, Sarah." As she watched him walk away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was caught in a web she didn't understand. The key in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. What had she stumbled into? And more importantly, how was she going to find her way out? As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself becoming more entangled in the web of secrets that surrounded the Blackwood mansion. The key Margaret had given her remained hidden in a small pouch beneath her mattress, its purpose still a mystery. Every night Sarah would take it out, examining its intricate design and wondering what locks it might open, both literal and figurative. One particularly dreary afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows of the mansion, Sarah was organizing Margaret's medications when she heard raised voices coming from Andrew's study. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly made her way down the hallway, pausing near the slightly ajar door. "You can't keep this up forever, Andrew," Dr. Hartley's voice rang out, tinged with frustration. "Your mother's condition—" "My mother's condition is none of your concern beyond your professional duties," Andrew snapped back. "Remember your place, Thomas. You're a family friend, but don't overstep." There was a heavy silence before Dr. Hartley spoke again, his voice lower but no less intense. "I made a promise to your father before he died. I intend to keep it whether you like it or not." The sound of approaching footsteps sent Sarah scurrying back to Margaret's room, her heart pounding. What promise had Dr. Hartley made, and what was Andrew trying to hide about his mother's condition? Later that evening, as Sarah was helping Margaret prepare for bed, the older woman seemed more lucid than usual. She patted the space beside her on the bed, inviting Sarah to sit. "You're a good girl, Sarah," Margaret said, her blue eyes clear and focused. "Reminds me of myself when I was your age, before I married into all of this." She gestured vaguely around the opulent room. Sarah hesitated before asking, "Mrs. Blackwood, can I ask you something?" "The key you gave me." Margaret's expression sharpened. "Ah, the key. Have you figured it out yet?" "Figured what out?" The older woman leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "It opens a safe. In the library. Behind the painting of the ship in storm. But Sarah, you must be careful. The contents of that safe, they could change everything." Before Sarah could press for more information, there was a knock at the door. Linda entered, her face a mask of professional detachment. "Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his study, Sarah. I'll finish up here with Mrs. Blackwood." Sarah's stomach churned with anxiety as she made her way to Andrew's study. Had he somehow overheard her conversation with Margaret? As she entered the room, she found Andrew standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "Ah, Sarah, please come in," he said, turning to face her. The warm light from the desk lamp cast shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. "I hope you're finding your work here satisfactory?" Sarah nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, your mother is a wonderful woman." Andrew's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Indeed she is, and quite fond of you, it seems." He took a sip of his drink before continuing. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with her, even outside your regular duties." I enjoy her company," Sarah replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. Andrew set his glass down and moved closer to her, his cologne filling her senses. "That's commendable, but I hope you remember our agreement about discretion. My mother's ramblings, well, in her condition, she sometimes says things that might be misinterpreted." The threat in his words was thinly veiled. Sarah swallowed hard, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood, I understand." He studied her face for a long moment before stepping back. "Good. That will be all, Sarah. Good night." As she left the study, Sarah's mind was racing. The key, the safe, Andrew's warning, it all pointed to something big, something potentially dangerous. But she couldn't back out now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. The next morning, Sarah found an unexpected ally in Linda. The housekeeper cornered her in the kitchen, her usual stern demeanor replaced by one of urgent concern. "Listen carefully," Linda whispered, her eyes darting around to ensure they were alone. "I've worked for this family for 20 years. I've seen things, heard things. Whatever you do, don't trust Andrew. He's not the man he pretends to be." Before Sarah could respond, Linda pressed a small piece of paper into her hand. "If you need help, call this number. It's Dr. Hartley's private line. He's one of the few people who truly cares about Margaret's well-being. With that, Linda bustled away, leaving Sarah staring at the crumpled paper in her hand. The plot was thickening, and Sarah felt like she was balancing on a knife's edge. That afternoon, while Andrew was out at a business meeting and Margaret was taking her usual nap, Sarah decided to investigate the library. Her heart pounded as she entered the massive room, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. Her eyes scanned the walls until they landed on the painting Margaret had described, a ship battling a furious storm. With trembling hands, Sarah moved the painting aside, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. This was it, the moment of truth. She pulled out the key Margaret had given her, inserting it into the lock with bated breath. It fit perfectly. As she turned the key, Sarah heard the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. She opened the safe, her eyes widening at its contents. Inside was a stack of documents, a small leather-bound journal, and an old photograph. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the photograph. It showed a younger Margaret standing beside a handsome man who bore a striking resemblance to Andrew. This must be Andrew's father, Sarah realized. But there was someone else in the photo, a young boy no more than 5 or 6 standing between them. The boy's face had been violently scratched out. As Sarah began to rifle through the documents, her blood ran cold. Medical reports, legal papers, and what looked like private investigator notes, all pointing to a shocking truth. Andrew wasn't an only child. He had a brother, a twin brother who had supposedly died in a tragic accident as a child. But according to these documents, the brother hadn't died at all. He had been sent away, hidden from the world, for reasons Sarah couldn't yet fathom. The sound of a car pulling up the driveway snapped Sarah back to reality. Andrew was back. In a panic, she shoved the documents back into the safe, keeping only the journal, which she quickly hid in her apron pocket. She barely had time to replace the painting before she heard footsteps approaching the library. "Sarah, what are you doing in here?" Andrew's voice made her jump. She turned, trying to school her features into a neutral expression. "I was just looking for a book to read to your mother, Mr. Blackwood. She mentioned she enjoyed poetry." Andrew's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm. "How thoughtful of you. But I'm sure there are more suitable books in her personal collection. Why don't you run along now? I have some work to do here." Sarah nodded, hurrying out of the library. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure Andrew must hear it. The weight of the journal in her pocket felt like it might drag her down at any moment. That night, after ensuring Margaret was comfortably asleep, Sarah retreated to her room and pulled out the journal with shaking hands. It was Margaret's personal diary, dating back over 40 years. As Sarah began to read, the true story of the Blackwood family began to unfold before her eyes. Margaret had given birth to twin boys, Andrew and Alexander. But Alexander had been born with a congenital heart defect. Fearing for his younger son's future in a cutthroat business world, Margaret's husband had made the cruel decision to send Alexander away, to be raised in secret while receiving the medical care he needed. The official story was that Alexander had died, allowing Andrew to grow up as the sole heir to the Blackwood fortune. But as Sarah read on, she realized the deception went even deeper. Margaret had never agreed to this plan. She had fought against it, threatening to expose the truth. That's when things had taken a dark turn. Margaret's episodes weren't the result of natural cognitive decline. She was being drugged, kept in a state of confusion to prevent her from revealing the family's darkest secret. Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. The kind, confused woman she had grown to care for was actually a prisoner in her own home, held captive by her own son. And somewhere out there, another Blackwood son was living a life he knew nothing about. A soft knock at her door made Sarah jump. She quickly hid the journal under her pillow before calling out, "Who is it?" "It's me, dear," Margaret's voice came through the door. "May I come in?" Sarah opened the door to find Margaret standing there, looking more alert than she had in weeks. "Mrs. Blackwood, you shouldn't be out of bed. Is everything okay?" Margaret's eyes were clear and determined as she stepped into the room. "No, Sarah, everything is not okay, but I think you know that now, don't you?" She glanced meaningfully at the pillow where Sarah had hidden the journal. "It's time you learned the whole truth about the Blackwoods about Andrew, and about the brother he thinks he's erased from existence. Sarah's heart raced as she ushered Margaret into her room, quickly closing the door behind them. The older woman moved with a purpose Sarah hadn't seen before, her usual fragility replaced by a steely determination. "Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah began, but Margaret held up a hand to silence her. "Please call me Margaret, and before you say anything, yes, I know about the journal. I've been waiting for someone like you, Sarah. Someone brave enough to look beyond the facade this family has maintained for decades." Sarah retrieved the journal from under her pillow, holding it out to Margaret. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have—" Margaret waved away her apology. "You did exactly what I hoped you would do. Now listen carefully. We don't have much time." Over the next hour, Margaret filled in the gaps of the story Sarah had begun to piece together. The tale she wove was one of love, betrayal, and a family torn apart by greed and ambition. "Alexander and Andrew were inseparable as children," Margaret said, her eyes misting with memories. "But Alexander was always the gentler soul. When the doctors discovered his heart condition, my husband saw it as a weakness that could threaten the Blackwood legacy." She went on to explain how her late husband, in collusion with a network of powerful friends, had orchestrated Alexander's disappearance. The young boy was sent to live with a distant relative in Europe, his identity completely erased. "I fought against it with everything I had," Margaret continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "But in the end, I was powerless. They threatened to take Andrew away too if I didn't comply, so I played along, all the while searching for a way to bring my son home." Sarah's mind was reeling. "But the medication, your condition—" Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "A convenient way to keep me quiet. Oh, I have my bad days, certainly. The grief and guilt take their toll. But the episodes Andrew so carefully monitors, nothing more than a cocktail of drugs designed to keep me confused and compliant." As the full weight of the situation sank in, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Margaret, we have to do something. We need to contact the authorities, get you out of here." "It's not that simple, my dear," Margaret interrupted, her voice tinged with sadness. "Andrew has connections everywhere. Police, local government, even some judges. No, we need to be smarter than that." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Alexander is alive, Sarah. I've known for years, but I could never find a way to reach him. He's living under an assumed name in a small town just outside of Boston. That's why I never left, why I endured all of this. I couldn't bear to be far from him, even if I couldn't see him." Sarah's mind was racing. "But how can we—" A sharp knock at the door cut her off mid-sentence. Andrew's voice came through, smooth but with an undercurrent of suspicion. "Sarah, is everything all right? I thought I heard voices." Margaret squeezed Sarah's hand, her eyes pleading. In that moment, an unspoken agreement passed between them. Sarah cleared her throat, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's fine, Mr. Blackwood. I was just reading aloud to myself. An old habit to help me sleep." There was a pause before Andrew responded. "I see. Well, try to keep it down. And Sarah, remember what we discussed about discretion." They listened as his footsteps receded down the hallway. Margaret let out a shaky breath. "We're running out of time. Sarah, I need you to do something for me, something dangerous." Before Sarah could respond, Margaret pressed a small, folded piece of paper into her hand. "This is Alexander's address. You need to find him, tell him the truth, but be careful. If Andrew suspects anything, he won't hesitate to silence you, permanently." The gravity of the situation hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She thought of her sister Emily, of the life she'd hoped to build. But looking into Margaret's eyes, filled with years of pain and hope, she knew she couldn't walk away. "I'll do it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll find Alexander." The next few days were a delicate balancing act for Sarah. She maintained her usual routines, caring for Margaret and interacting with Andrew, all while secretly planning her mission to find Alexander. Every moment felt charged with tension, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in on her. It was during one of her rare days off that Sarah finally made her move. She told Andrew she was visiting her sister, but instead she found herself on a bus heading to the outskirts of Boston. The address Margaret had given her led to a modest house on a quiet street, a far cry from the opulence of the Blackwood mansion. With her heart pounding, Sarah approached the front door and knocked. A moment later, it opened to reveal a man in his mid-40s, the spitting image of Andrew, yet somehow softer, kinder in his features. "Can I help you?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. Sarah took a deep breath. "Are you Alexander Blackwood?" The color drained from the man's face. He glanced nervously up and down the street before ushering Sarah inside. Once the door was closed, he turned to her, his eyes a mix of fear and curiosity. "How do you know that name? Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Collins," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I work for your mother, Margaret Blackwood, and I'm here because she needs your help." Over the next hour, Sarah told Alexander everything about Margaret's condition, Andrew's deception, and the years of secrets and lies that had torn the family apart. Alexander listened in stunned silence, occasionally pacing the room or running his hands through his hair in disbelief. "I always knew something wasn't right," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My aunt, who raised me, she would sometimes let things slip, especially when she'd had too much to drink, but I never imagined, God, my own brother did this." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Your mother has been trying to find a way to reach you for years. She's never stopped loving you, Alexander." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "And I never stopped loving her, even when I thought she had abandoned me. Somehow, deep down, I knew there was more to the story." He turned to Sarah, his expression hardening with resolve. "We have to get her out of there, away from Andrew." "It won't be easy," Sarah warned. "Andrew has eyes and ears everywhere. And your mother, she's not always lucid. The medication—" "We'll figure it out," Alexander interrupted, a familiar determination in his eyes that reminded Sarah so much of Margaret. "I've lived my whole life not knowing who I really was. Now that I know, I'm not going to sit back and let my mother suffer any longer." As they began to formulate a plan, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and terror. She was in deep now, embroiled in a family drama that seemed more suited to a soap opera than real life. Yet here she was, playing a crucial role in reuniting a mother and son, and potentially bringing down a man who had built his empire on lies and manipulation. Days passed, and Sarah returned to the Blackwood mansion, carrying the weight of her secret meeting with Alexander. She went about her duties as usual, but every interaction with Andrew now felt like a chess match. She analyzed his every word, every gesture, looking for signs that he might suspect something was amiss. One evening, as Sarah was helping Margaret prepare for bed, the older woman gripped her hand tightly. "Did you find him?" she whispered, her eyes clear and focused. Sarah nodded, glancing nervously at the door. "Yes, he knows everything, and he wants to help. We're working on a plan to get you out of here." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "My boy, my Alexander, I knew you'd find a way." She pulled Sarah close, her voice dropping even lower. "But be careful, my dear. Andrew is not to be underestimated. He has eyes and ears everywhere, and he'll stop at nothing to protect what he sees as his birthright." As if summoned by his mother's warning, there was a knock at the door. Andrew entered, his face a mask of polite concern. "How are we doing this evening, Mother? Sarah, a word in the hallway, please." Sarah's stomach churned as she followed Andrew out of the room. He closed the door behind them, then turned to her, his grey eyes cold and calculating. "You seem to have developed quite a close relationship with my mother, Sarah." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I care about her well-being, Mr. Blackwood, that's all." Andrew stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Indeed, and your recent day off. I trust you had a pleasant visit with your sister?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Had she been followed? She forced a smile. "Yes, thank you. It was nice to catch up." Andrew studied her face for a long moment, then stepped back. "Good. I'm glad to hear it. Remember, Sarah, loyalty is very important in this household. Very important indeed." As he walked away, Sarah leaned against the wall, her legs weak with relief and fear. The game was becoming more dangerous by the day, and she was walking a tightrope between truth and deception. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. Little did Sarah know, the biggest challenges, and the most shocking revelations were yet to come. As she returned to Margaret's room, her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. The Blackwood family secrets were beginning to unravel, and Sarah was at the very heart of the storm. The following weeks were a delicate dance of secrecy and strategy for Sarah. She continued her duties at the Blackwood mansion while secretly communicating with Alexander, planning their next move. Every creaking floorboard, every shadowy corner seemed to hide potential danger. The weight of her knowledge pressed down on her, making each interaction with Andrew a test of her nerves. One crisp autumn morning, as Sarah was helping Margaret in the garden, she noticed Dr. Hartley's car pulling up the driveway. There was something different about his demeanor today, a sense of urgency in his steps as he approached the house. "Sarah," he called out, his voice low and rushed, "I need to speak with you, privately." Exchanging a worried glance with Margaret, Sarah excused herself and followed Dr. Hartley to a secluded corner of the garden. "I've been doing some digging," he began, his eyes darting around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The medication Andrew has been insisting I prescribe for Margaret, it's not what he claims it to be. It's a cocktail of drugs designed to keep her confused and compliant. I can't in good conscience continue this charade." Sarah's heart raced. This was the break they needed. "Dr. Hartley, there's something you need to know." But before she could continue, Andrew's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Thomas, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you were scheduled for a visit today." Dr. Hartley straightened up, his face a mask of professional calm. "Andrew, yes, I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in on Margaret." Andrew's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze flicking between Sarah and the doctor. "How thoughtful. Why don't we continue this conversation in my study? Sarah, please see to it that my mother gets her rest." As Sarah watched them walk away, a chill ran down her spine. She had a sinking feeling that Dr. Hartley's impromptu visit might have just complicated things even further. Later that evening, as Sarah was tidying up the library, she overheard raised voices coming from Andrew's study. Quietly, she crept closer to the door, straining to hear the conversation. "You're making a grave mistake, Andrew." Dr. Hartley's voice was filled with barely contained anger. "This has gone on long enough. Your father's actions were unconscionable, and you're perpetuating his crimes." "Watch your tone, Thomas." Andrew's voice was cold, threatening. "Remember who you're talking to. My father built this empire, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it, including dealing with meddling old fools who can't mind their own business." There was a sudden scuffle, followed by a heavy thud. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Heart pounding, she quickly retreated to Margaret's room, her mind reeling from what she'd just heard. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Margaret asked, concern etched on her face. Taking a deep breath, Sarah recounted what she'd overheard. Margaret's face paled. "We're running out of time," she whispered. "Andrew is becoming more desperate. We need to act now." That night, unable to sleep, Sarah made a decision. She needed to get a message to Alexander. Quietly, she crept down to the kitchen, intending to use the house phone. As she reached for the receiver, a hand clamped down on her wrist. "Making a late-night call, Sarah?" Linda's voice made her jump. The housekeeper's face was a mix of fear and determination. "I know what you're trying to do. I've known for a while now." Sarah's heart sank. This was it. Linda would tell Andrew and everything would fall apart. But to her surprise, Linda's grip softened. "I want to help," she said quietly. "I've worked for this family for 20 years. I've seen the truth of what Andrew has done. It's time to make things right." With Linda's help, Sarah was able to get a coded message to Alexander. The plan was set in motion. In 2 days' time, they would make their move to get Margaret out of the mansion and expose Andrew's deception. As the appointed day approached, tension in the Blackwood mansion reached a fever pitch. Andrew seemed increasingly agitated, barking orders at the staff and spending long hours locked in his study. Sarah did her best to keep Margaret calm and prepared for what was to come. The morning of the plan arrived, grey and drizzly. Sarah went about her usual routine, her nerves on edge. Everything hinged on perfect timing and a bit of luck. As she helped Margaret dress, She whispered reassurances. "It's going to be okay. Alexander is waiting. We'll get you out of here." Just as they were about to make their move, Andrew burst into the room, his face a mask of fury. "I knew it," he snarled, grabbing Sarah's arm roughly. "You've been plotting behind my back. Did you really think you could outsmart me in my own home?" Margaret stood up, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. "Let her go, Andrew. This ends now. I know everything about Alexander, about what you and your father did." Andrew's laugh was cold and mirthless. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do about it, Mother? You're a confused old woman. Who would believe you over me?" "I would." A new voice entered the fray. Alexander stepped into the room, his presence commanding attention. "Hello, brother. It's been a long time." The color drained from Andrew's face. For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. Then, in a flash, he pulled out a gun, waving it wildly between Sarah, Margaret, and Alexander. "You're not going to ruin everything I've built," he hissed. "I am the rightful heir to the Blackwood fortune. Me, not some weak, sickly twin who was better off forgotten." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. But it was Margaret who took control of the situation. With a strength that belied her years, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on Andrew. "My son," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Look at what greed and ambition have done to you. This isn't the boy I raised. It's not too late to make things right." For a moment, Andrew's resolve seemed to waver. The gun in his hand trembled slightly, but then his face hardened once more. "No," he spat. "I won't let you take everything from me. I'd rather see it all burn." He turned, aiming the gun at Alexander. Time seemed to slow down. Sarah saw Andrew's finger tighten on the trigger. Without thinking, she lunged forward, knocking his arm just as the gun went off. The bullet splintered the wooden floor, missing Alexander by inches. In the chaos that followed, Linda burst into the room, followed closely by the police. Dr. Hartley had alerted them, providing evidence of Andrew's crimes that he'd been gathering for years. As the officers subdued Andrew, the full weight of what had just transpired hit Sarah. She sank to the floor, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Margaret knelt beside her, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "It's over," Margaret whispered. "You did it, Sarah. You saved us all." In the days that followed, the Blackwood family's secrets were finally brought to light. Andrew was arrested, facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The truth about Alexander's existence and the years of deception were revealed to the public, sending shockwaves through Boston's high society. Margaret, free from the drugs that had kept her confused for so long, began the long process of reconnecting with Alexander. Sarah watched with joy as mother and son began to rebuild their relationship, marveling at the strength of their bond despite years of separation. As for Sarah, she found herself at a crossroads. The Blackwood scandal had made headlines, and she had job offers from several prestigious families who were impressed by her integrity and bravery. But something held her back from accepting. One sunny afternoon, as she sat in the garden with Margaret and Alexander, Sarah finally understood what she wanted to do next. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, "about everything that's happened and about what I want to do with my life." Margaret reached out, taking Sarah's hand in hers. "Whatever it is, my dear, you have our full support. You're family now." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I want to start a foundation," she said, "to help families who have been torn apart by secrets and lies, to give them a chance at the kind of reunion you and Alexander have had." Alexander nodded approvingly. "That's a wonderful idea, Sarah, and I think I speak for both of us when I say we'd be honored to help you get it started." As they sat there planning for the future, Sarah realized that her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined when she first walked through the gates of the Blackwood mansion. She had come looking for a job, but had found so much more: a family, a purpose, and the courage to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. The Blackwood mansion, once a place of secrets and sorrow, was now filled with hope and new beginnings. And Sarah, the young woman who had unraveled its mysteries, was ready to write the next chapter of her own story. In the months that followed the dramatic events at the Blackwood mansion, Sarah found herself navigating a new chapter of her life, one filled with both challenges and unexpected joys. The Sarah Collins Foundation for Family Reconciliation was slowly taking shape, with Margaret and Alexander's unwavering support providing the cornerstone for her vision. As autumn gave way to winter, Sarah sat in her small office, poring over applications from families seeking help. Each story touched her heart, reminding her of the profound impact secrets and lies could have on people's lives. She was so engrossed in her work that she barely noticed the soft knock on her door. "Burning the midnight oil again?" Alexander's warm voice made her look up, a smile spreading across her face. "Just trying to get through these applications," Sarah replied, gesturing to the stack of papers on her desk. "There are so many families out there who need help." Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're doing amazing work, Sarah, but don't forget to take care of yourself too." As they chatted, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd all come. Alexander had stepped into a leadership role at Blackwood Enterprises, working tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation and right the wrongs of the past. Margaret, free from the fog of medication, had become a fierce advocate for elder rights and was currently writing a memoir about her experiences. And Andrew... Sarah's heart still clenched when she thought about him. He was awaiting trial, the evidence against him overwhelming. The last time she had seen him, being led away in handcuffs, she had caught a glimpse of the scared, insecure boy hiding behind the mask of the ruthless businessman. It was a reminder that even the most seemingly villainous actions often stemmed from deep-seated pain and fear. "Have you heard from Emily lately?" Alexander asked, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. Sarah's face lit up at the mention of her sister. "Yes, she called yesterday. She's doing great in college. The scholarship from the Blackwood Educational Fund has made such a difference." It had been one of the first initiatives of the new Blackwood Enterprises under Alexander's leadership, a scholarship fund for promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. Emily had been one of the first recipients, a fact that filled Sarah with immense pride and gratitude. As winter deepened, the foundation faced its first major challenge. A high-profile case involving a politician's long-lost child had landed on Sarah's desk, threatening to thrust her and the foundation into the spotlight. The media frenzy that followed was intense, with reporters camped outside the office, hungry for any tidbit of information. One particularly cold morning, as Sarah made her way through the throng of journalists, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Linda, bundled up against the chill, a determined look on her face. "Linda, what are you doing here?" Sarah exclaimed, ushering the former housekeeper into the warmth of the office. Linda's eyes were bright with purpose. "I've been thinking, Sarah, about everything that happened and about what you're doing here. I want to help. I've spent years keeping secrets, but now I want to use that experience to help families heal." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Linda had been an unexpected ally in the Blackwood saga, and her desire to continue making a difference touched Sarah deeply. "We'd be honored to have you, Linda. Your insight would be invaluable." As Linda settled into her new role at the foundation, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. The Blackwood mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now stood empty, its future uncertain. But from its shadows, a new kind of family had emerged, one bound not by blood or money, but by shared experiences and a common purpose. The high-profile case that had initially caused such a stir turned out to be a turning point for the foundation. Sarah's careful handling of the situation, prioritizing the well-being of the family involved over media sensationalism, earned her widespread respect. More importantly, it resulted in a tearful, joyful reunion between a father and the daughter he had never known existed. As spring bloomed in Boston, Sarah found herself back at the Blackwood mansion. The sprawling estate was being transformed into a retreat center for families going through the reconciliation process. Walking through the once oppressive halls, Sarah marveled at how different everything felt. Rooms that had once hidden dark secrets were now filled with light and hope. In the garden where she had first overheard Dr. Hartley's concerns, a memorial had been erected. It honored not only the Blackwood family's journey, but also served as a reminder of the countless other families torn apart by secrets and lies. Sarah paused before it, running her fingers over the engraved words. Truth heals what secrecy breaks. A gentle hand on her shoulder made her turn. Margaret stood there, looking healthier and happier than Sarah had ever seen her. "Penny for your thoughts, my dear," Sarah smiled, linking her arm through Margaret's as they strolled through the blooming garden. "Just thinking about how much has changed. How much we've all changed." Margaret nodded, her eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "Life has a funny way of taking us on unexpected journeys. When you first walked through those gates, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "Never in a million years. I was just looking for a job to support my sister. I never thought I'd find all of this." As they walked, Sarah's mind wandered to the future. The foundation was growing, with requests for help coming in from across the country. Alexander was talking about expanding their work internationally, and there were whispers of a book deal, a chance for Sarah to share her story and inspire others. But amidst all the changes and new opportunities, one thing remained constant: the sense of family that had blossomed from the most unlikely of circumstances. Later that evening, as the sun set over Boston, casting a golden glow over the city, Sarah found herself on the balcony of her new apartment. It wasn't as grand as the Blackwood mansion, but it was hers, a symbol of her newfound independence and purpose. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a small wrapped package in the other. "I thought we might celebrate," he said, his smile warm and inviting. "The Foundation's one-year anniversary." As they sat on the balcony, sipping champagne and watching the city lights twinkle to life, Sarah felt a sense of contentment wash over her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fears she'd overcome, the truths she'd uncovered, and the lives she'd helped change. "I have something for you," Alexander said, handing her the small package. Sarah unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she saw what was inside. It was a key, not unlike the one Margaret had given her all those months ago, but new, gleaming with promise. "It's a key to the new retreat center," Alexander explained. "We all agreed. There's no one better to lead it than you, Sarah. You were the key to unlocking our family's truth. Now you can help others do the same." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she clutched the key. It represented so much more than just a new job or responsibility. It was a symbol of trust, of family, of the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. As the night deepened, Sarah and Alexander talked about the future, of the foundation, of the families they hoped to help, and of their own journeys of growth and healing. There was a warmth between them, a connection that had grown from shared experiences and mutual respect. Whether it would blossom into something more remained to be seen, but for now, Sarah was content with the sense of belonging and purpose she had found. When Alexander left that night, Sarah stood once more on her balcony, the key clutched in her hand. She thought about the young woman she had been when she first approached the gates of the Blackwood mansion, scared, desperate, but determined. That woman could never have imagined the twists and turns her life would take, the secrets she would uncover, or the family she would find. As she looked out over the city, Sarah made a silent promise to herself, and to all the families out there still struggling with their own secrets and lies. She would continue to be a force for truth, for healing, for reconciliation. The path ahead might not always be easy, but she was no longer walking it alone. The story of the Blackwoods had begun with secrets and deception, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of truth, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family, both born and chosen. And Sarah, once an outsider looking in, now stood at the heart of it all, ready to write the next chapter, not just for herself, but for all those who needed hope and healing. As she closed the balcony door and stepped back into her apartment, Sarah Collins knew that her greatest adventure and her most important work was just beginning.